I can't think of a single manga that I've reread anywhere close to as much as Tomo is a Girl. From the expressive, detailed art to the three-dimensional characters to the brilliant sense of wit and comedic timing, this is easily one of, if not the best romantic comedy that I've ever read. But one of the manga's best qualities, which no one really talks about, is how brilliant the panel composition is. The author uses a lot of really creative and effective tricks that are a huge part of making the manga as memorable and as impactful as it is. Some are obvious, like how he bypasses the short height of the 4 coma panels by using multiple panels for a single, highly detailed establishing shot that suits his more realistic character designs. However, there's some techniques the author uses that you may not have noticed, but have a profound impact on how much you take away from each page. For example, take just about any panel from the manga that has a lot of speech bubbles. Trace a line from bubble to bubble. This line is the path your eyes travel as you skim over the page. Notice how the mangaka usually makes sure that all of the most important visual information lies on this line. For example, it will pass over the face of any character whose facial expression is necessary to understanding the mood of the scene or that another character will soon react to. Not only does this make sure that even while skimming you get everything out of a scene that the author wants you to, it also draws your attention away from certain information. The mangaka will often use this in a very creative way. If a character isn't paying much attention to the actions or words of another, they'll frame that character in the focus of the panel, while the character they are ignoring isn't even fully inside the panel. This gets you into the headspace of the character and gets you to understand that they are ignoring them without actually mentioning it. Going back to the topic of how your eyes move across the page, manga are always read right to left. Because of this, rather than capturing a single moment in time, a single manga panel can show a dialogue that takes place over the span of several seconds, by having the first line of dialogue furthest to the right, the next one being to the left of that, and so on. All manga do this. However, Tomo is a Girl will often do something that I see considerably less often, where they will show not just dialogue, but physical actions taking place in response to one another within a single panel. The most common example of this would be a character performing an action in the right side of the panel, and another character physically reacting to that action on the left side. However, not all panels in this manga are actually intended to be read from right to left. There are some you're supposed to start from the left. This is done by having a speech bubble from one panel leak into the next panel. Whatever takes place around that speech bubble is the first thing that your eyes are drawn to. This is used to clever effect here, where the reader is caught off guard, just like the delinquent here when Jun kicks him. Much like how the delinquent doesn't see the kick coming before he gets hit, you see the impact before your eyes move to Jun's leg. What I'm about to talk about next is less of one technique and more of a series of techniques used in the same way and often at the same time. When the mangaka wants you to mentally separate the characters on the page into two groups, he'll use various techniques to make them visually disparate. He'll separate them with their horizontal position on the panel, vertical position on the panel, background and foreground, level of visual detail, and screen tones, just to name a few of his techniques. When one group is observing the other, disagreeing with the other, in opposition to the other, knows something the other does not, is walking away from the other, or any number of other scenarios, all the members of one group will be drawn in one way, while all the members of the other group will be drawn in a very disparate way, often utilizing more than one of the techniques I listed earlier. This technique is able to express a lot of the nuance of the panel in a very blatant visual way that's hard to miss, so even if you're just skimming over the panel, you'll have a fairly deep understanding of what's going on. When the mangaka is not utilizing this technique, he'll often draw the characters in a very particular way, where they're lined up perfectly perpendicular to the line between the viewer and the manga panel. All of the characters in this are drawn in more or less the same way, so it creates a strong contrast with all of the panels where he separates the characters into groups. It also does very little to get you into the mindset of any particular character, which makes it contrast well with what is possibly the mangaka's favorite panel composition. This panel composition is used when character A is reacting to something character B is doing, and the mangaka wants you in the mind of character A. Character A is drawn in the foreground, facing away from the reader and on one side of the page, while character B is drawn in the background, facing towards the reader and on the opposite side of the page. This is often used when Tomo says something ignorant, and Misuzu acknowledges it as ignorant. This panel composition clues the reader in that they are supposed to be thinking what Misuzu is thinking, and they will be more likely to understand that what Tomo said was ignorant, even if they aren't paying very much attention. It's also used here, where the first panel establishes the scene and the next one puts you in Misaki's head and helps you understand more clearly that he is terrified of Tomo and Jun. This is sort of a subset of the panels that split the characters into two groups, but it's so prevalent and utilized so well in so many different ways that I wanted to dedicate some time to talking about it. Another very interesting thing about this panel composition is that the mangaka has two different versions of it. Many times you'll have character A completely facing away from the reader. However, sometimes it's important to have character A's facial expression in view. In these cases, the mangaka will show the scene from an angle where you can see part of their face. This isn't the flashiest detail in the world, but it really shows how much the mangaka is thinking at all times about what information the reader receives in each panel. Now, everything I just mentioned was an oversimplification. There are plenty of times he uses a technique kind of like what I described, but not really. And I'm sure there's a ton of unobvious panel composition techniques he used that I don't know enough about art to pick up on. But I hope that the next time you read Tomo's a Girl, you keep an eye out for some of these techniques. Because while plenty of these techniques can be found in other manga, there are few manga out there where I see so much effort in creating meaningful and effective panel composition. Panels in Tomo's a Girl don't simply try and tell a story. They try to tell it in a way that is impossible not to absorb, and that expresses emotion before you can even read any of the words on a page.